Glen Taylor went from being a poor farmer in rural Minnesota to building a dynasty worth billions of dollars, spanning assets such as Taylor Corporation, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Lynx, Star Tribune, Minnesota United, and a network of more than 80 subsidiaries. Right here in the heart of the American Midwest, far removed from Silicon Valley's high-tech startups and Wall Street's glitzy trading floors, lies a story about a kid whose family struggled so much financially that he had to share a bedroom with his 5 brothers.
I don't want to do it. If I had some money, we'd have something different.
It's a story about a young man who went from making a single dollar per hour to owning the entire business that employed him. That same kid who used to play basketball by the family barn would go on to become one of the most prominent figures in the NBA. But Taylor's story is different from most self-made people we usually hear about in the media. You see, Glen Taylor didn't start a company. Instead, he used an alternate, arguably more reliable strategy to build his dynasty. A strategy that is often overlooked by aspiring entrepreneurs. But there's also a group of people who seriously dislike him.
What's going on here? Oh wow! Somebody's run onto the floor. Beverly goes into the front row on the other. What's wrong with these people?
Today, I want to tell you the story about Glen and the Taylor dynasty. Our story begins in southern Minnesota in the small town of Comfrey in 1941. Glen grew up on a dairy farm and was the second of 7 children. Let me tell you, these were hard times. The Taylors were barely getting by. While they owned a 160-acre farm, most of the money they made went straight to pay off the family's bank loans. Noodles were a common dinner dish. No meat, no vegetables, just noodles. And Glen recalls a story that makes him cry to this day.
Mom would serve us supper and stuff like this here. And it was like every night we had noodles, some kind of a noodle. It was the same noodle. And we would eat it. And one of us said something like this here. Why do we have to eat these stupid, icky noodles every night? And my mom cried and cried. That's in my memory, So it's in my memory, just so solid. She cried and cried. And then she says, oh, I don't want to do it. If I had some money, we'd have something different. But that's all we have. And I think, what a mean bunch of boys we were.
Maybe this was a way for the Taylor children to cope with their circumstances, but the parents must have done something right. They set high expectations and demanded that the kids help out with farm duties at home and excel at school. This set the foundation for a relentless work ethic. When machines broke down on the farm, the kids were expected to fix it. It didn't occur to them that they could drive into town to buy spare parts. They simply couldn't afford it. So they had to make do with whatever resources were available and make repairs on their own. This is a skill that would prove to be very valuable in Glen's entrepreneurial pursuits later on. He was a competitive kid and always wanted to score the highest points in school. When he was put in a lower level reading class, he pestered his teacher to allow him to join the more advanced reading group. It took months until the teacher caved in, and when she finally did, Glen took the advanced book home, memorized it, and came back to class the next day, exceeding the teacher's expectations. Similar to his mom, Glen was a great student, ranking second in his high school. And like his dad, he was a killer athlete. He ran track, played basketball, and was the starting quarterback on the football team. But his participation in high school sports ended abruptly. Not because he got injured. No, what happened was considered to be much worse. You see, news broke that his girlfriend Glenda was pregnant. This was a big deal. They were just 16 at the time and juniors in high school. But they loved each other and decided to do what they thought was the right thing. You know, let's get married and move in with Glen's parents. This was of course tricky. The Taylors could barely support the family as is, so to help out financially, Glen took on additional work at a neighboring farm. But Glen's behavior wasn't welcomed by the community. You see, while it was common for people to get married at a young age in the 1950s, 16 was still very young. The principal of Comfrey High School was concerned about the example Glen and Glenda's marriage would set. He didn't want anyone to think that this behavior was the right thing, so he expelled Glen from school. This was a big blow to Glen, but luckily, Glen's teacher appealed on his behalf, helping him get readmitted. But there was a caveat. He wasn't allowed to participate in extracurricular activities anymore. He was banned from playing sports his entire senior year of high school, something he would seek revenge for as an adult. After graduating high school in 1959, Glen moved 50 miles east to Mankato looking for a job. He applied to every job possible, from a clerk job at a hotel to working at a drugstore. He desperately needed money to support his growing family and to pay for college. His brother recommended that Glen apply for a job at a local print shop called Carlson Wedding Services, owned by a man named Bill Carlson. What? A print shop? For weddings? What the hell am I going to do at a print shop? Glen wasn't remotely excited about it, but he needed the money, so he took the job. How much did he get paid? $1 per hour. But it turns out this would be one of the most impactful decisions of his life. Throughout his late teens and early 20s, Glen juggled life as a father, student at Mankato State University, and employee at Carlson Wedding Services, which would later be renamed Carlson Craft. He studied math and physics in college with a goal to become a teacher. But sometimes life has other plans for us. You see, at the time, Carlson's print shop was generating $150,000 in revenue, which is close to $1.5 million today. It was a classic small business with lots of inefficiencies and untapped potential. Their primary source of revenue was printing wedding invitations. This was a low volume and time-sensitive task. Wedding season usually occurred in the summer, which meant that most customers wanted their services fulfilled at the same time. These wedding invitations, of course, also had to go out on time. And so to meet this time-sensitive demand, most print shops defaulted to limiting the selection that customers could choose from. As a customer, you could only get your wedding invitations printed on 2 types of colored paper, ivory or white. You also only got to choose from 2 types of fonts, one font for Catholics and one for Protestants. None of the employees at Carlson's bothered to question whether this approach made sense or not. Most of them were in their 50s, and this is how things had always been done. Don't fix what ain't broke, right? Well, 21-year-old Glen was actually broke. He was young and determined to make a buck, joining the company full-time after graduating college in 1962. And this is where it gets interesting. Rather than sticking to the status quo and listening to the older generation, Glen decided to listen to the younger generation instead. They were the ones getting married after all. His former classmates at Mankato State told him what type of wedding invitations they wanted. They wanted all kinds of designs and colors, not just ivory and white. Some people even wanted to include lines from poems. This small mindset change to actually listen to the customer significantly improved customer satisfaction. But this approach would only be sustainable if they could streamline the production process. So Glen led an initiative to cut down the amount of time it took to produce and deliver the wedding invites, all of which boosted the company's earnings. Glen, who was now 25 years old, started to believe in his own abilities. Could he maybe, perhaps, become a millionaire one day? What would it take? He knew that real wealth came from one 9-letter word: ownership. But he didn't own a stake in the business he was working for. Like everyone else, he was simply being paid an hourly wage, a terrible one at that. This meant that all company profits were distributed to Bill Carlson, the owner, no matter how hard Glen worked. But what if he did own part of the business? Could he potentially convince his boss to sell him a stake? How would he do that? And more importantly, how the hell would he pay for it? Glen approached Bill and asked him if he would be open to sharing some of the company's profits with him if Glen could boost the company's performance without incurring extra costs. Bill wasn't so sure, but he agreed. What did he have to lose? And so Glen immediately set out to work. Using his farm boy handiness, he took old parts from a car, a stove, and a TV to rebuild a stamping press. This allowed him to print a customer's name and design on wedding invitations in 1 step instead of 2. This homemade innovation helped save the company 1 cent for every printed invitation. Now, 1 cent might sound little, but for a company that was printing thousands of invitations, the savings started to compound into larger and larger profits. By 1975, Carlson's revenue exploded to $6 million. Glen had now worked at the company for 13 years and had held every job possible at the firm. He was 34 years old and knew the company better than anyone, probably even better than Bill Carlson himself. He wasn't rich, but he had saved up some money. Bill, who had founded the company after World War II in 1948, was nearing retirement and wanted to make sure that the reins of the business were passed on to the right person. Who do you think gets tapped for the opportunity? You guessed it, the farmer boy from Comfrey. Glen offered Bill $2 million to buy out his majority stake. What? $2 million? Didn't I just say he wasn't rich? Yeah, I did, and he wasn't. but Glen structured the deal in a way that would allow him to pay for it despite not having a ton of money. You see, the purchase price was to be paid out over 12 years, which limited the amount of capital Glen had to pay out of pocket. This type of seller note is a debt instrument, but Glen didn't take on any traditional loans to finance the acquisition. In fact, he's always been skeptical about debt. My guess is that Glen's general view on this was impacted by his parents' experience on the farm. Recall how most of the farming profits the family made were gobbled up by their lenders. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that debt is bad, but I do find it interesting how a lot of the people we study on this channel had their business strategies influenced by their early days. Malcolm Glazer, for example, who bought Manchester United in 2005 and who we covered a few episodes ago, loved using other people's money for his acquisitions. This is something he discovered in his early 20s when Malcolm and his mother began investing in real estate together. There's no right or wrong, of course, it all depends on the acquirer's risk appetite. Shortly after the acquisition, Glen set up the holding company Taylor Corporation with Carlson Craft as its first subsidiary. While he was excited about this first acquisition, he knew it wasn't going to be his last. The goal was to use Taylor Corporation as his primary acquisition vehicle. Using Carlson's cash flow generating printing business, Taylor Corp began accumulating large cash reserves that could be used for both organic and acquisitive growth. Only 8 months after his first acquisition, Glen was already working on his second deal, McPherson's, an Indiana-based wedding stationery company. McPherson's was struggling, doing less than $1 million in sales, so Glen offered to take over the business. He once again got the owner to agree to seller financing, which meant that he didn't have to take out any bank debt or put a lot of equity down himself. Glen was quickly proving himself to be both a savvy business operator and a sharp deal maker, two incredibly valuable skills for a holdco entrepreneur. For each acquisition, his goal was to retain the existing management team whenever possible and make sure that they were incentivized for the long term. In an interview, he explained, "Each of these companies are privately held, family-run, profitable businesses, and every owner will be staying with Taylor to help us further their growth and success." To fill open positions when he needed help opening new locations in California or Texas, he hired graduates from Mankato State, his alma mater, saying, "They went to school at MSU because the cost was low. Their families didn't come from money. They all had to work their way through school and many were getting good grades doing it." These were people he had a shared experience with and trusted, but he also seems to have a natural ability to read people, which has helped him decide who to hire and what companies to buy. "I'm a mathematician by education, but I have this other thing, a gut instinct." And it's not a bad instinct to have. Since Glen's first acquisition in 1975, Taylor Corp has acquired hundreds of small businesses in the graphic communications industry. It sort of blows my mind that he's 83 years old and has worked in the same industry his entire life. This clearly gives him an unfair advantage. He doesn't need to be an expert on every industry or topic, he just needs to understand his specific vertical better than anyone else, which through his network of 80 subsidiaries makes him pretty tough to beat. I also find it interesting that Glen Taylor still lives in Mankato, where Taylor Corp is headquartered. He has definitely compounded the company's earnings over a long time horizon, but living in the same place for such a long time has also allowed him to compound his relationships. I think this is an often overlooked strategy among young people, including myself. Everyone always seems to want to move somewhere new and be a digital nomad, but that often requires us to reinvest in new relationships over and over again. In some ways, Glen's approach to stick around in Mankato is similar to how Buffett has stayed in Omaha for so many years. There's power in proximity. Taylor's a private company, but according to estimates, the company generates $2 to $3 billion annually with 10,000 employees. Glen alone is worth $2.9 billion. Through Taylor Corp, he has executed a roll-up on steroids. Those personalized business cards you hand out, printed by Taylor. The promotional pens you got at the last conference, most likely created by Taylor. But how the hell do you manage to successfully acquire so many companies? You see, because Taylor Corporation operates in a large market, the graphic communications industry is estimated at $58 billion, there will always be another business to buy. It's a highly fragmented industry where businesses range in size from smaller mom and pop shops to larger corporations. They also vary in their product offerings from traditional print, digital print, packaging, and various marketing services. In addition, as we discovered during Glen's earliest days at Carlson's, there's an ever-growing demand from customers to have their products customized and personalized. This, in combination with technological advancement, has further led to small businesses specializing and focusing on a certain niche or product type, something bigger companies might not be able to offer themselves. And so Taylor targets these smaller companies that have complementing service and product offerings, which allows Taylor to offer a more comprehensive suite of solutions to its clients. But here's the kicker. Many of the companies that Taylor acquires are previous Taylor customers. Remember, these targets are small businesses. They usually have an existing relationship with a bigger vendor like Taylor Corp to help meet their operational requirements. So by working with these small businesses on a daily basis before an acquisition, Taylor gets an inside look at how these businesses operate and what their unique challenges are. By acquiring and integrating these businesses into its existing ecosystem, Taylor can leverage its domain expertise to streamline processes and boost output, turning the traditional customer-supplier relationship into a deeper, more synergistic partnership. This scale economy, in turn, further drives Taylor's growth and market dominance. Not a bad acquisition flywheel. Glen Taylor has come a long way from his roots as a farm boy in Comfrey. As if being a savvy operator and deal maker in the graphics communications industry wasn't enough, in 1994 he bought the NBA team, the Minnesota Timberwolves, for $88 million. In 2021, he agreed to sell a majority stake to entrepreneur Mark Lowry and A-Rod for $1.5 billion, representing a 16x return on his original investment. But not everyone is a fan. In 2022, activists disrupted several Timberwolves games, invading the court and supergluing themselves to the floor. Why? You see, Glen owns Rembrandt Farms in Iowa, a large-scale factory farm that produces millions of eggs each year. But in March 2022, Rembrandt's facility experienced an outbreak of bird influenza. To prevent the influenza from spreading, the company had to kill more than 5 million birds, using a method called ventilation shutdown. This didn't sit well with animal rights activists who blamed Glen for being inhumane. Glen has also been criticized for his ownership of the Timberwolves and particularly his feud with NBA Hall of Famer Kevin Garnett. But whether you admire or dislike him, there's no denying the impact Glen Taylor has had. His journey from a farmer boy in Comfrey to building a business empire is nothing short of impressive. And such is the nature of personal growth. It can lead to unprecedented success, but also pose public challenges. If you enjoyed this video, I think you'll like my breakdowns of Malcolm Glazer and Francois Pinault's careers as well. They had similar journeys as Glen Taylor, building their business empires through strategic acquisitions rather than starting them from scratch. I'll link those videos here and here.